John, I like your backdrop. That is pretty awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm jealous that I'm on a Chromebook that can't handle different Zoom backgrounds. I also to hide this mess behind me, but I think it's too low quality for you guys to see.
All right, good evening, everybody. It is 5 o'clock, so just the usual reminders. This meeting is being recorded. It is also being live streamed to YouTube. And please remember to raise your hands before speaking so we can work on crosstalk. And with that, John, please.
Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Again, we're a little bit over the midpoint of our time here together. It's 5 o'clock on the dot. So I want to also recognize Today we recognize the indigenous people resilience and the strength as well as the immeasurable and positive impact they have made on every aspect of American society. In Tigard, the first people in Tigard area, the Kalapuya, and you can learn more about the Kalapuya at the Tigard Heritage Trail and also the Outdoor Museum. So check them out if you want to learn more about it. With that, I am going to ask if Kim could do a roll call for us.
Yeah, but first I wanted to ask, and I think Valerie had something she wanted to add to the National Indigenous Peoples Day conversation.
Sure. That'd be great.
So I sort of came in about halfway through John's statement, so I think I may have missed part of it. What did he say?
He basically gave the statement that you had sent in the email.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention, and it doesn't look like we've got everybody here, but one of the things that came out of sort of our email back and forth about this earlier today is that there doesn't look like there's a good acknowledgement available on the city website of the first peoples that were here, and so we were going to suggest that maybe that's something that City Council might want to develop and suggest that to staff, because a lot of the other communities in the area have a really nice thing that they've developed with some of the other with some of the Indigenous First Nations folks, to acknowledge that and open meetings with that. And I think it's just a really nice thing to do to acknowledge, the contributions, as John was saying when I came in. So I would just suggest that maybe we want to ask city staff if that's something they've developed with or could develop with for City Council.
Would that be like a proclamation, Valerie?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, could take the form of a proclamation, but I think, formalizing your statement and formalizing some of the discussions that, led to the passage of the recent House bill that made Oregon acknowledge Indigenous Peoples Day in lieu of Columbus Day. I think that would be really great. And I think it would be a positive step towards at least some of the values that led to the creation of this group, such as a focus on diversity and equity and, acknowledgement of the lived experience of all of the people in our region.
Yeah, I'll forward that, Valerie, your suggestion, since we have council tomorrow night. I will tell you though, if we've missed the boat internally, we had very robust links and great explanations that I was able to read this morning to our internal from our DEI team. So they were on top of it. Yeah, they were on top of it. They sent it out to all employees. And so if we've missed the mark externally, I will relay your guys' suggestion.
Yeah, and just working. Kim had a really good point in that like we could go and look at some of the maps of First Nations groups in the area and see, okay, well, we think these groups were here, but there are still descendants of those folks who are living in our area, and so working with them to maybe for next year to develop some way to recognize this on the, second Monday in October, in a really positive community building sort of way, I think that would be great. But thank you for passing that along, Chief. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And there's a report that just came out that it may be important to all of you. I don't know of any cases in Tigard, but just how many Native American women are trafficking, missing, killed. And I think this came out when, was it Gabby Petro was, yeah. And I was not aware of that till I listened to a podcast, and that report is out there. So I don't know the numbers, but my understanding is fairly staggering.
Thank you for that, Chief. Pass that along. Actually, before we do a roll call, I just want to maybe do a quick statement and also a centering our exercise with everyone here. So I invite you to join me in centering our conversation tonight. First, I'll read a statement, and then I ask you to join me in the breathing exercise to help bring focus and thoughtfulness to our conversation today. So today we are convened to listen and learn from each other through reflection and discussion as we reevaluate and improve our public safety practices. We elevate the voices and experience of our communities who have been and continue to be disproportionately impacted by inequitable systems. We thank you all, those who have advocated and worked on dismantling injustice in Tigard and our broader communities. We build off of their efforts to create more equitable and just outcome for all people of all backgrounds and abilities. The purpose of our meeting is to develop our understanding of current public safety structure, practices, and procedure, identify and eliminate institutional racism within Tigard Public Institution by centering equity and racial justice, bring forth the concerns and experience of ourselves and our community, and bring recommendation to the city leadership to improve the lived experience of all people in Tigard. Now we'll do a breathing exercise, and you may turn off your camera for this portion. Close your eyes and gaze softly downward. Feel the chair under your legs. Breathing deeply through your nose and out of your mouth. Feel your hand on your lap. Breathing deeply through your nose and out of your mouth. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathing deeply through your nose and out of your mouth. Slowly open your eyes and begin to breathe normally. Thank you all for participating in creating space with me. Kim, can you help us do the roll call, please?
Yes, absolutely. Commander McDonald.
Here.
Officer Nunn.
Yep.
So Shelby Rahala won't be joining us tonight. Michael O'Brien.
Here.
Emilio Calderon.
Here.
Liz Newton. No. John Trin.
Present.
Jimmy Brown. I see you mouthing here.
Here.
Lee Landers. All right. Lee, I see you. I don't know if you're able to mute or unmute. Patty Lofgren.
I am here.
Justin Lowe.
Here.
Danny Rauda. Not here. Valerie Sasaki.
Here.
Sean Stoldryer.
Here.
Nick Darmer.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff Mott. All right. I see Jeff on the screen. I don't know if you, Jeff, if you are trying to unmute. Okay. John, that is roll.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank you, the board, for coming together and spending your time to be here with us tonight, because your voices and experience are important. in this discussion, and really in terms of how do we dismantle and get rid of racism and institutional racism. And our discussion tonight is going to talk about in terms of various topics. So I appreciate your involvement and your participation. So with that, I'm going to pass over to the chief to give us an update.
Oh, John, can you do the public comment?
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. You're right. All right. I don't think there was any public comments tonight. So tonight there was no public community members have joined us to speak. So public comment are vital to the board mission, and we welcome the community feedback to our work. If you have comment for the board, written testimony must be submitted by 4:30 p.m. the day of the scheduled meeting. So if you'd like to speak at our meeting, please email our staff. And I'm going to ask Kim if she could display the staff email where you could go ahead and submit your public comment. So comment can be submitted at www.tigard-or.gov/PSAB. And to speak at future meeting, email Eduardo Ramos at tigard-or.gov. All
Thank you,
right.
John.
Thank you. Back to you, Chief.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning, good evening, not good morning. I don't want to start this day over again. That would make it way too long. Not a lot of real updates other than, as you know, the next phase for our officer involved shooting is the use of force board, which Commander McDonald is in charge as a service commander of putting that all together. And I think, as I mentioned, it's a fairly extensive document, but we're moving forward, and we believe we're shooting for the first week in November for that to occur. And of course, I will keep you all updated as we move along in that process. So that's where we're at on that end. And then the other thing that I'm trying to do, and I appreciate, Jimmy reaching out to me, wanting to know what was happening along Hall Boulevard, and just share, because it really paints a picture of really what we're seeing out in the community, and actually, definitely in the Northwest. I'd probably be correct in saying nationally, but it's just the mental health crisis, and what does that look like? So our call was by TriMet bus driver for a homeless individual carrying a machete. And so he got off the bus and was walking along Hull Boulevard. And so we attempted to contact him as we were trying to find out, did we have a crime of threatening the bus driver with that machete? And it was great to hear, Jimmy's report out as he's seeing it from a distance, that we obviously had the streets blocked off. We kept a great distance. One of our new lateral officers did a great job of dialoguing until we got mental health response team. In the meantime, we've got everybody at the skate park egging everybody on, trying to actually fire everybody up and record what's going on. So you can always imagine there's a distraction that way. And then having an officer at least find out if we have a crime. At the end of the day, the driver either alluded to not pursue anything, or was just glad that the individual was off the bus. But that took a lot of resources, a lot of patience. It goes to, when we talk about de-escalation, we say the components are time, distance, cover, and communication. And that was just one way that we were able to slow the roll, see what we had, didn't get any closer to kind of confront anything. At the end of the day, we ended up letting them walk away because we didn't have anything. That's an uncomfortable position to do, but it was the right thing, because you don't know their intent going down the road. But the day before that, another call of an individual that called 911 multiple times, saying that he wanted to kill a Tigard police officer and wanted a response of us to show up at his place. And again, it's a constant drain on the 911 system. We obviously don't go in to engage him. There's no point in it. We know that he's alone. And then he changes tactics and wants to be evaluated for a psychiatric evaluation, and is trying to draw medical response and police there. The medical personnel, both fire and AMR, are not going to go without us. And so there was a very thoughtful, strategic conversation as to what we were going to do. There was a thoughtful plan of kind of a bullhorn type talking him out. At the end of the day, he didn't want to go. And at the end of the day, we ended up walking away. But his interest was definitely to, as he said, kill a Tigard officer. So again, and that was a long resource intensive call. And I just create a little bit of awareness to this board, as I've also started sharing those with the city manager and assistant city manager on just, these are not new for us. These happen actually more frequent than anybody would probably care to want to know. But just knowing, resources, and that we do apply, time, distance, cover, and communication. We do try and really slow our roll. So our officers understand it. They understand that they don't have to just come running in, busting down the door, and just want to kind of share some calls, share the thoughtfulness of our officers, but also our sergeants in assessing the situation and not, making it worse. But at the same time, you always hold your breath, hoping that they don't then turn around and harm anybody else. But obviously we check that out. We try and vet it out to see if anybody is in harm's way. But those were two just this weekend that occurred. Just want to bring your awareness to that. And then the other is, and I see Danny's here, the conversation of outreach and how that's going. But I also want to offer to all of you that at some point, if you would like to do a chat with the chief virtual, I'd be happy to introduce a couple of the PSAB members. And then we can do a dialogue, a facilitation of what the role is, and remind everybody again how to reach all of you. But I'm willing to use that platform to try and, create a level of awareness. The other thing we can do is a more virtual kind of town hall where I'm not the lead. So it's not a chat with the chief, and we just call it out, and maybe more members are on the board. You get a chance to introduce. So if you have a chance to think about that, and if you're interested in something like that, I want to help facilitate the connection between the Public Safety Advisory Board and our community, and whatever platform I can use and the city to make that happen. I want to be able to offer that to all of you. So no decisions tonight have to be made, but again, if that's something that interests you, then we can start planning on what that might look like. And I think that's my update.
Chief, you had sent a video to me last week. Would you like me to play it?
That's why I count on you to remember these things, because I can't tell you what all has been in my brain between that time and this time. Would you please? And then I'll answer any questions after that video. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Mike Plummer. Yo soy el oficial Irizarry de la policía de Tigard.
Hi, I'm Diana Dyra.
My name's Officer Mark Scott. I am a father. I am a husband.
And I am a Tigard police officer.
I grew up in Camas, Washington.
I was actually born in Nairobi, Kenya, and that was because my parents worked for the American Embassy.
I was born in Vietnam. I was adopted at around 6 months by a family in Southern Oregon.
Spanish is my first language.
Prior to law enforcement, I was working in the private sector.
My folks spent most of their time in Latin America, but we also spent a few years in Poland and in Indonesia. And I think the fact that I had been exposed to some other ways of life and some other cultures kind of given me a little bit of a sensitivity. And I feel kind of a commonality with some of our immigrant population here in the metro area.
born and raised in Gresham, went to Barlow High School, then went on to go to Portland State where I played football.
Through my time as a EMT, I realized that I wasn't as passionate about the medical side of things as I was the first responding side. And then I actually went back to school for my degree in Homeland Security Emergency Management. And through that, I decided that this was the route that I wanted to take.
I chose law enforcement because my brother is actually a police officer, so he set the first stepping stones for me.
I was a deputy for the Wasco County Sheriff's Office for almost 9 years.
Prior to Tigard PD, I worked for a police department down in the East Bay of California, and I worked with a lot of diverse people, different groups of people.
My philosophy as a Tigard police officer, or just as a police officer or as a human being, is to treat everyone with respect and dignity.
My 3 adopted children, they're my kids. I love them to death. I have a girl and 2 boys. They're from St. Louis, Missouri, and they are African-American children. They have opened my eyes to a lot of different things in life and biases that I didn't know really existed.
And my passion is to make a difference in my community. And Tigard, from the get-go, was my number one agency that I wanted to work for.
We need to be able, as the officer, to kind of understand and hear what the person has to say and how we can actually help them or what we can do for them that day.
I've been a police officer for 27 years prior to coming to Tigard. During that time, I spent about half my time on patrol and the other half as a detective, working child abuse cases and property crime.
I try to get people to look beyond the badge and the uniform and look at me and connect with me on like I said, on a personal basis.
It is an amazing opportunity. It's something that I actually never saw myself doing. But I'm really happy to be here. And I'm really thankful that although my path might not have been traditional, that it did lead me here.
Simplemente quería decir a la comunidad hispana que los oficiales de la policía de Tigard están aquí para servirle y ayudarle. I said I wanted to say to the Latino community that the officers from the Tigard Police Department are here to help you and to serve.
When I'm not working, I play soccer and I go camping.
Growing up in high school, I was pulled into different directions as far as hobbies. I ran track, and I was the oddball that did pole vaulting, because who wants to jump over poles at 10 plus feet? I was also pulled into equestrian team, the Oregon High School equestrian team. A lot of people don't know that.
I just wanted to say thank you for welcoming me into the community and the department.
I just want to say that the city of Tigard has a great police department, and I think the officers here really care about their community, and I feel that the community reciprocates, and that makes for a great place to work.
If you see me out in the community, really have an open door policy. Please come say hi, get to know me, stop me. If I don't see you, flag me down, and love to meet you.
We have a lot of great things coming here in Tigard.
Thank you, Tigard, for passing the Police Services Levy. This wouldn't be possible without you.
So, Kib, I got a message from the chief. She got bounced out of the meeting. She must have forgot to pay her internet bill or something at home. So we'll use that as the story until she gets back in, at least.
Sergeant Duncan just texted me. He got kicked out too.
Okay. Well, I'll ad lib until they get back in, or at least until Tom does. Although we do have another short video. I think.
Commander, before we go to the other short video, we've got a comment or question from John.
Oh yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Lovely video. I appreciate that. I do have a question in terms of, was any of the levy dollars used to help promote or retain diverse officer within the PD?
Well, I mean, we're always, in terms of recruiting, we're always recruiting as diversely as possible. There wasn't anything specifically in the levy that was directed towards that. I mean, because that's just part of our standard recruiting mechanism anyway. So there wasn't any specific dollars to that. So partially because that's just how we've been operating for years anyway. I guess it didn't really cross our mind to add additional funds for that specific point, just because that's the target that we use always, and we were before the levy came up too.
Valerie, please.
So this is more by way of clarification, because I know we've gotten questions about this in the past. So one of the officers in that video, which I thought was a really great video and really positive, and they seem really nice people actually. One of the officers had a black line over his badge with a blue stripe through it. Do you want to mention why he would have that on his badge? I think it may be something that people may not understand when they watch the video.
Yeah, sure. So that was probably during the time there was a Clark County deputy that was killed in the line of duty. So that video was probably filmed with that particular officer during the time. It's called a mourning ban. So when an officer falls in the line of duty, it's customary for other agencies, then the chief authorizes us to wear a mourning band for a period of time over your badge. It's a sign of honor to the fallen officer who died in the line of duty. So that's what it means, is showing that honor to that fallen officer. And I'm almost 100% certain that it was for the Clark County deputy that died in the line of duty a couple of months back.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted to clarify, since I think people might get questions about it. So
sure.
Any other questions or comments about the video? Or Chief, would you like to add anything? So you're back.
Yeah, I missed all of it, but I watched it quite a bit. And, even though we've lost a couple of other officers that even are some phenomenal people and just didn't either pass the probationary portion of this. So we had to pare it down a little bit. But, when I see that one, Kelsey, our PIO, did a phenomenal job in really trying to bring out, people's a little bit more personal, trying to give a little bit of their background that I certainly enjoyed during this process to read about and to ask about them. And hopefully that resonated with you on who we're trying to bring into this family and to serve the community that you live in.
Justin, please.
Hi, thank you. And that was an incredible video, and I'm very excited and impressed with the folks that you brought on with the levy. I had a general question actually for either the chief or commander. Understanding that during this current period of time, there is a lack of folks in the public service or public safety field in terms of being able to fill spots and fill roles in departments that are lacking. I noticed, I think, at least two of those new officers for the police department mentioned that they came from other departments or other places, or what you all had dubbed as laterals to us earlier this year. And I was just wondering if it is becoming more common to see more laterals in hiring and application pools, either in Tigard specifically or in our local region.
Yeah, that's a great question, Justin. And it was my goal when we had the 8 officers, and I guess 9 if you count the SRO, was to have half laterals and half entry level. It's a nice mix, you're not waiting that whole several months in the academy. Laterals can usually come in, get their training, and hit the ground running. And we actually did that. We accomplished that. Obviously, laterals take a close eye, right? Why are you coming here? The ones that you saw was because they either had come from Oregon or wanted to come back to Oregon, and they had just gotten their start somewhere else. And so usually family or this region is what tells me, okay, that's as opposed to somebody just running from a different agency. And we get plenty of those, right? And so we vet them. But we do try and have a healthy mix. We've had a lot of people leave around this region and go out of state. Texas seems to be a popular one, and you know, Idaho and a few others, as you can imagine. So we are seeing those leave, but equally, it's not as large as we'd like to, because all of us are hiring is people who are interested in coming to the Pacific Northwest.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, and for the context as well, in terms of the folks that you did bring on and their reasons for coming in. I hadn't remembered that you mentioned that some folks usually need a more finer magnifying glass on them when it comes to laterals, but that's really great to hear for the folks that you did bring on.
Thank you. And then if we didn't mention, this video is also done in Spanish, entirely in Spanish. So we've sent both links out.
Thank you, Chief. And we've got a question from Sean. Comment.
Thank you. Just thanks for sharing that video with the community and with this group. It was really great to see those officers as who they are as people and hear their backstories. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. And Commander, we have another video for the group. Would you like to introduce it or talk about it after?
Yeah, sure. I'll introduce it. First, I just want to let everybody know that the cross section of men and women that you saw that are the levy hires, that's a very fair representation of the type of people that you would see throughout the entire organization. If we were to have everybody talk a little bit about themselves, you would hear a wide variety of different things. Today, I had one officer telling me about how excited he was when he found out that his daughter was engaged over the weekend, which he kind of knew about ahead of time. And then another officer that was telling me about how exciting it was to watch his child play fourth grade football over the weekend. So we've got, and he's a coach too. So it's a good cross section of the type of people that we have here and the interests that they have as well. So showing their activities outside of work is really important to us. So this next video, it's just a short clip, but it was something, I think Valerie, you asked about it, about camera comparisons. So since we don't really have body cam comparisons to do, we did dash cam comparisons. And again, our PIO, she's totally crazy about doing video stuff. So she put this together. It's a short clip. And then I can talk a little bit about it afterwards if anybody has any questions.
And I watched this ahead of time. I'm correct, it doesn't have sound?
There probably is no sound. Yeah.
Just checking.
Yeah. So that was short but sweet, but surprisingly enough, working with one of our lieutenants, she was able to find 2 traffic stops in the exact same location on the old system versus the new system. You can see the one from July of 2020. It was a bright day outside. The one from October, it was an overcast or a rainy day. And you can see the difference in the quality of the video. You couldn't even read the street signs in the old system. The new system was crystal clear, better than probably all of our eyesight, actually, higher resolution than our eyesight. So anyway, that we put up on our webpage so people could see the comparisons, and I wanted to make sure that all of you had an opportunity to see it as well. So that's the new technology in action right there.
Thank you, Commander. And we've got a question or comment from Jimmy.
This is in relation to the officers that were hired, and I can't remember if we've said in Tigard that there's a residency requirement, but do we know how many of those officers are residents of Tigard or just in the surrounding area?
I don't know off the top of my head how many live, if any live in the city. I know that a couple of them at least live in adjoining communities. And for sure, one of them, because that's where he and his family lived prior to becoming a police officer. And so I don't know specifically. I'd have to look it up, Jimmy, to know for sure.
Thank you. And Valerie, please.
Oh, thank you so much for putting together that comparison. That was really pretty striking to me, how different they are. And Kim, can we put a link to wherever they are on the department's website into our materials as well, just so that if someone's watching this, it's easy for them to find?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. As far as I know, Chief Commander, your updates are complete, but let me know if I'm wrong. Oh, Justin.
Thank you. Now that the Chief and Commander have said that their updates are done, I had two questions for either one of them, whoever wants to take it. The first being, and I'm sorry if my memory is failing me on this, but I remember last week or 2 weeks ago, you were explaining more about the process for the use of force board. And if I'm remembering correctly, you're listing off the folks who would potentially sit on it. And I was wondering if there would be, or if there has been any consideration to add a public member or a public member of the city to sit on the board as well. So that's my first question, if that's come across your mind.
Justin, was that to sit on the use of force board? Did I hear the front part of that? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that conversation has already occurred, and have been speaking to the union on that. Usually when you change policy like that abruptly, I said, if it doesn't happen this time, we'll definitely put it in place. Well, I don't want it to be a next time, but you'd have it in the policy place. But I've had the conversations with the union regarding that.
I see. I'm presuming that's something that fell under contract and negotiations, and that is why that is the answer.
Yeah, in Tacoma, we did have two community members on our board, so it's something that I'm very, very familiar with. And again, we're also looking at ORI did a whole use of force review for Hillsborough, and I'd like to take a look at that document, lessons learned on how they do boards. There's some conflicting stuff that doesn't fit within how Washington County does it. More similar to how I'm used to in Tacoma. And so if we're going to kind of do an overhaul or do some of these things, I'd like to take a lot of information. And I think the Washington County chiefs and sheriffs would benefit with working with the DA on a more collaborative process, and then make if there is to be a holistic change. So definitely those conversations are happening. So thank you for asking.
Oh, of course. Thank you for that response, and also for mentioning the work that you've already been thinking about in the conversations you've had. That's wonderful to hear. The second one actually comes from some high school folks that I have been talking to earlier today. And they pointed out of all folks, they pointed me to attention to this obscure article that popped up in the Oregonian about hate crime statistics that were recently reported by the FBI's Uniform Crime Report. I believe that's something that all the departments in the area contribute to. And I noticed, unfortunately, that right there in the second paragraph of the article, Tigard is noted as the second highest ranking city in Oregon for hate crimes per 100,000 students, or sorry, residents, 100,000 residents. I am more than happy to forward this article to Eduardo, and if anyone else is interested in this, but this is on Oregon Live. And I just wanted to know if there is anything that you all in the department were aware of in regards to this, because I had no idea that we would be the second in the state in terms of our rates for hate crimes. But I also am aware that that statistic is contextualized with the fact that there's a lot of underreporting, especially in a place like Portland and surrounding areas. And so that has probably led to a lot of underreporting in surrounding areas. But was still unfortunate to see that Tigard had popped up, especially since I know how intentional the police department is with working with the community. And also we have an entity like this to bring in community members and to work collaboratively.
Yeah, and Justin, you bring a valid point on just data in general, but I was not aware that we were sitting second. So yes, I would love to see that article. I think, at least speaking for this agency, I know we take it very seriously, and the laws have changed, and the training has been updated on, basically it's not whether or not an officer thinks it's a hate crime, but whether the person believes it to be a hate crime. And if we check that box, then in days gone by, it was, well, you got to be able to articulate it, and you got to be able to put some foundation to it. And so if the people reporting believe it is, we're checking that box. So I would like to hope that we're just doing some more accurate reporting, but again, it can be concerning, because if people are perceiving the reasons why they're being targeted or victimized of a crime, it's because of the color of their skin or their other beliefs, that is concerning. And I know in this COVID world, that was people are a little bit under stress and far more vocal, but I'm happy to dive a little bit more into that to see if you send me that link, I'll do a little bit more inquiring, because that'll be good for me to know as well.
Of course, thank you. I'll be sure to forward this link to the rest of the board. Heads up, it is paywalled because it is on Oregon Live.
Yeah, Justin, the way it's normally done, I know you send it to Eduardo and he gets it out to the board. He's actually out on vacation for the next week. So if you want to send it to me, I'll make sure it gets out to everybody.
Thank you, Kim. I'll be sure to forward it to you. And so that way that can also get up on the website.
Thank you. And Jimmy, please.
Okay. I will say, for transparency's sake, that that Justin and I did not meet ahead to talk about this, but I had the same question, and I'm not sure if Justin was talking about use of force board in general, or specifically the group that will be reviewing the process from the January shooting. And I know I've missed the last couple of meetings, which I apologize for. So, Commander, if you could at least refresh my mind as to the composition of the review board. Is it inclusive of any community members, or is it primarily management staff and any outside law enforcement or district attorney personnel?
Yeah, so the policy as it's currently written, Jimmy, is internal. There's 4 internal personnel and then 1 from an outside agency. And so the construct is, it would be an instructor in the discipline of force. So it'd be a firearms instructor. It would be a lieutenant, or the language is an administrator or someone from the admin level that wasn't involved in the incident, but from the same division. It would be another supervisor, and then a member of the union of the Police Officers Association, and then an outside agency use of force representative. So someone that is versed in use of force, specifically in deadly force scenarios or encounters. So that's as the policy is currently written or was written at the time of the incident. That's the makeup of the use of force review board.
And is that process then continuing beyond the incident that you will be reviewing? And if so, is that what has to pass the contract negotiation process?
It doesn't necessarily have to pass a contract negotiation process. It's a policy change, and that would be a conversation that generally happens between the chief and the and union leadership. So it would be when we make a change to policy, we always discuss those changes with the union, right? For a couple of reasons. One, we want to make sure that we're not missing something that we should have in it, but also so that they have the opportunity to weigh in and view it before the policy becomes, or before the policy change is made. So yeah, the review process is what we would do with the union moving forward for any changes in the policy. One of the things that we always do when we look at these, when we look at an incident like this, is the policy that applies has to be the policy that was in place at the time of the incident, right? Because we make updates to policy on a regular basis. And so when the review board when they are tasked with reviewing the incident itself, if the policy or a policy that may be applicable has been changed since then, we have to make sure that the policy that they're using is the policy that the officers knew at the time of the incident itself, right? Sometimes it's the same with law. Sometimes law changes and it has to be at the time of the incident itself, right? So that's what we do with policy. So they will be reviewing the incident based on the policy that was in place at the time of the incident. So as of January 6th. And there were some significant policy changes that had occurred in the month or two directly prior to that because of some law changes that were directly applicable to our policies. And then there have been to at least one of the policies has been a subsequent change since then because of some additional legal changes that came about in the most recent legislative session. So we have to be very careful to make sure that the policy that is being used to evaluate the actions of the officers at that time is what policy was in place at that time. So fortunately, within a day or two of that incident, I actually printed out that specific version of the policy to make sure that I had it in a hard copy, so that if the policy did get updated, although our system has a way of going back and finding this specific one to make sure that we're using the correct one. But I printed it out to make sure that every time I look at it, in relation to that particular incident, I'm looking at the correct policy to apply it. So can it be changed moving forward? Absolutely.
Okay, I totally get that. I totally understand the issue about what is the policy that is in effect at that moment versus changing the policy and then reviewing incidences based on the new policy. So I would offer up the opportunity exists to get in front of an incident that hopefully doesn't happen in the future. But if it does, we have a policy that would suggest in those boards, there should be a non-sworn individual, presumably with community ties, that would sit to provide a diverse perspective on the actions that may have occurred inside of a particular incident. And I say that not because it's to armchair quarterback, but in conversations I know that I've had with my neighbors and other folks about this past incident, there are the types of questions that people who are not involved in law enforcement may have that could open up a different viewpoint as to those kinds of incidences. It may offer a question that may not necessarily be thought of by those who are sworn officers simply because they have a different viewpoint. And I'm all about trying to ensure that, the things that our department are doing represent a transparent, open opportunity, even if those bits and pieces of information coming from some non-sworn member may go against what sworn officers may have in terms of their experience and expertise and their skill set. So just a suggestion that as you look at policy changes going forward, that we think in terms of could a community member, non-sworn police officer, provide some insight into these kinds of incidences that will help us going forward to develop better policies?
Yes, the answer is yes, yes, and yes.
Damn, that was quick.
Yeah, as Justin asked, and I'm not going to put Nick on the spot, but he and I have had conversations because again, we did it in Tacoma. We had 2 community members, one at large and one wherever the officer involved shooting occurred in that neighborhood, right? And as long as they were part of the neighborhood council. So it's something I'm very, very familiar, very comfortable. And I too find it more beneficial for our community to kind of see all the decisions that are being made, everything that goes behind the scenes. And so it's just a matter, like Commander McDonald relayed, is do you introduce it right when you have an incident and change the flow of things as it's written, which again, talking to CIS, it's not always the preferred, but you can move forward. So we're just talking about that, whether or not, for sure, going anything, God forbid, happen again, maybe it'll be another 45 years, we'll have that in place. But I also want to incorporate the ORI's recommendations to Hillsborough, and then to work with Washington County DA, because I think there's going to be other things that we need to change, and it would be nice to do it collectively in Washington County as a whole. So yes, we're definitely moving in that direction.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, and then I'll be quick because I know we have an agenda to get to. I wanted to let folks know that maybe listening in the public that yes, I did happen to drive by the incident that was occurring at Hall Boulevard the other day. And I can attest to what I thought were some really good moments by our police officers that were there. As I mentioned to Chief, in many instances, we see officers engage with community members, and there might be multiple voices speaking at once, which I don't know about y'all, but I'm kind of like a squirrel, so if I hear 2 or 3 people talking to me at once, I'm gonna have a challenge trying to understand who I'm going to listen to. There was one officer that was speaking. Everyone else was attentive, but it was one person communicating with the individual that was having the crisis at that time. I was very aware of both time and distance relative to, how long I was sitting there waiting for things to kind of move forward so I could get through. The distance that officers were from the individual that was in crisis. There was no sense of we're going to go in your space. We are going to have this one individual communicate with you and keep your attention to that one individual. And I thought, maybe that's something you all have been talking about to the officers. And if you have, they clearly have utilized that particular process in engaging with that individual. So I just, wanted to publicly say, I think that was well done. I don't know who the officers were. I know there were a good 5 to 6 officers that I saw. And I just think they should be, given some kudos for handling that situation in such a manner.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, everybody, for the robust discussion. And now I think, John, we can move on to the next portion of our agenda.
Great, thank you. All right, the next agenda will be the police vehicle operation with Sergeant Duquesne. Sergeant, you want to take us off?
Yeah,
Sergeant, I'll be
I'll give
manning
a
your
quick-
presentation for you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And I'll give a quick intro. Most of you should remember Tom from when he did the police legitimacy and procedural justice presentation with Sergeant Clarkson. So Tom you're our most senior sergeant, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Tom's our most senior sergeant. He's been with Tigard for, I won't tell you how long, but a really long time, longer than me. Tom was actually one of my coaches. And he's in charge of he's the sergeant in charge of our emergency vehicle operations training program. And so Tom's going to talk with us tonight a little bit about what we do for training, why we do it. And then more importantly, we're going to talk a little bit about pursuit management and police pursuits in general. So Tom, please take it away.
Yeah, if whoever could start the PowerPoint, that'd be great. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, like what Jamie said, our focus on our emergency vehicle operations program is, safety, safety, safety. That's the scope and that's the optics that we want to look at everything through. We always want to teach our officers to do their job in the safest way possible, and especially while driving a vehicle. We have officers out there 10 hours a day or 10-hour shifts driving vehicles, potentially up to 70 or 80% of that time, especially on a night shift. On night shift, it's not unheard of for officers to put 50, 60, maybe even 70 miles on a patrol vehicle, driving in their district and then driving on the surface streets and the highways. We want to make sure that the officers are driving in a safe manner all the time, whether that's what we call like a code 1 type of response, whether that's just normal driving, or even like up to like a code 3 response, which is our highest level of emergency driving. And then minimize the risk of injury and the use of techniques to avoid and minimize collisions. We've used not simulators, but in the past we've used what's called a skid car concept, which teaches officers how to keep their vehicle in control when their tires have very minimal contact to the ground, simulating ice, snow, heavy rain to that degree. Next slide. So the Academy teaches officers vehicle stability, and we still focus on that. The officers, when they go through the basic police academy, get 44 hours between track time and classroom training. We focus on the vehicle stability, meaning the most capable control of a vehicle. It also allows the vehicle to keep a steady platform, which we try to teach as like a pendulum shifting with the vehicle and trying to keep that pendulum as stable as possible. The drive at 70% of your vehicle and 70% of the vehicle's capability, we always want to have that room for error, both in our driving skills and in the vehicle's capability. And then our focus is always keep 100% of control all the time. So that's never driving above your ability, always driving in control, keeping your hands on the wheel, really focusing on your driving while you're especially driving at code or higher speeds. Next slide. So yeah, like I said, the training is consistent and constant. Officers get 44 hours done at the academy. When we have yearly in-service training, we do generally do a classroom portion, talking about case law, talking about different techniques, vehicle equipment that's out there that's new. So many of our vehicles anymore have either like a stability control program, lane departure programs, collision avoidance. Some of your higher end cars even have cruise control that monitors. Even some of our police vehicles have cruise control that if you're using it allows you to maintain a constant distance between you and the vehicle you're following. Stable vehicle platform, overall vehicle operation. Our whole patrol fleet is all Ford Interceptor, police Interceptor utilities. Ford calls it an FIU, and they're specifically rated for pursuit type driving, and they have additional heavier like alternators and things like that because of the increased electrical demand on our patrol cars. Next slide. Pursuit driving management. This is what Commander McDonald was talking about. I really want to focus on. So again, this is all through the scope and through the optics of safety. Pursuit driving actually happens on a very rare occasion. I can think of only a handful of pursuits in the last few years. The main thing is choosing when to disengage or discontinue a pursuit. I think Tigard has really developed a culture in our agency where it's best to err on that side of caution rather than pursuing a vehicle that legally we are allowed to pursue, even by policy, we're allowed to pursue, but maybe not pursue that vehicle because it's not the right time of day. There's too much traffic. The weather conditions aren't the greatest. It's a lot different than when we're doing this down at the academy and training on a closed course. We can do that, and we know that we're not going to place any citizens' lives in jeopardy because we know that it's a closed course. But we also practice, to disengage and terminate that pursuit. It used to be we would pursue for a lot of property crimes, and anymore, that's something I'm very proud to say that we don't do it. That other neighboring jurisdictions, very, very, very so often they still pursue for those crimes. And like I said, I'm proud, and I think I've had a lot of input on our culture and our organization to potentially not pursue a vehicle that, like I said, legally and by policy we could. And I think that's actually the last slide.
Thank you, Sergeant Duncan. Does anyone have questions about the topic?
Hey, Kim, I just wanted to pop in here real quick. Tom talked a little bit about pursuit management, and I kind of like to give Tom props for that. Our first line supervisors, our sergeants, are the ones that they bear the weight of the decision making on pursuit management. And so Tom talks about the culture of pursuits. It's not only with the officers, but the sergeants. It's their responsibility to make that decision. And if I'm a sergeant and I've got an officer that is chasing someone, I'm not going to use the word pursuit, but they're chasing someone, and someone is failing to yield, which is something that an officer might say if they're trying to say, well, I may be in a pursuit, but I'm not really in a pursuit. Our sergeants do an excellent job of asking all the right questions. What are you chasing him for? Is always the first one. And if they don't get the right answer immediately, they're shutting it down. And that is, there's a lot of reasons for that. Tom said that he can only think of a handful of pursuits. We looked it up. I think we've only had 8 pursuits in the last 3 years. And I can't even count the number of pursuits that supervisors have terminated before they even really started, where they're like, no, we're not pursuing for that. So it is definitely in our culture that we will only chase for the most egregious the most egregious things. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add when it comes to that?
Yeah, I thought of a couple different things. Like I said, I'm very proud of our culture and the fact that we don't chase vehicles. And one of those particular occasions, well, actually two, like I said, one was when I came into work early on a day and the night shift sergeant came up to me and says, "Hey, you're never going to guess what happened last night. We got into this pursuit of somebody driving a stolen car, and I thought about it and I let it go on for just a quick amount of time, and then the driving got so bad I terminated." And he goes, "I thought about you and how you always would talk about that in training." So that was a really good story that a newer sergeant shared with me. And then I also have one where I was actually in the vehicle. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was riding with another sergeant, and she had a decent amount of time on, but I was very much senior to her, and it had a lot more experience than she did. And we actually got behind a stolen car and started to pursue it. And, we were talking about video earlier, and if you went back and were able to see that dash cam, you can hear me telling the other sergeant, "Hey, we need to terminate. We need to terminate." You can actually hear me in the video telling this other sergeant, and she listened, and we shut it down, and they got away. But, all in all, nobody got hurt. It was a stolen vehicle, and I think it even got recovered later. So it was a win. So.
So does anybody have any questions on how we train our folks or how we do things in regards to pursuit management or emergency vehicle training? I will say this, it's a little different than, it's not like driver's ed in high school, right? We're teaching officers to drive these vehicles actually rather aggressively. And that's by design. They need to know what the vehicles are capable of and what they can do under different circumstances and conditions and things like that, so they won't get into crashes with them. That's the critical part. And the reality is most of the crashes that our officers get into are backing incidents where they back into, believe it or not, other police cars, like in the parking lot, or posts and things like that. Unfortunately, that's the reality of most of the incidents that we have, and they all have backup cameras too, which it just baffles me that we can back into things when we have backup cameras. So, but anyway, any questions about this stuff? Because it somewhat falls under, it could fall under use of force. That's why we included it in this section. So, Valerie.
So I just had one question, and maybe I missed in the presentation, but we talked about vehicle pursuits. Do the same training and rules apply with respect to the motorcycle officers?
Well, the same policies apply, but their training is very, very different. So they're probably even less likely to pursue. Mainly because, go ahead.
In terms of policy, motorcycle officers are allowed to get into pursuits, but if there are marked patrol vehicles, like an actual four-wheel vehicle, it's much more preferred that a marked vehicle, because they have a better lighting package, they have a better siren. It's for most instances, it's actually a more stable platform and a better vehicle to have in a pursuit than a motorcycle.
Right, and that's why I was wondering, is because at 9 months out of the year it's pretty damp around here, and so I would feel very concerned about the poor motorcycle officers out there and trying to pursue and on two wheels.
And our motorcycle officers do a really good job. I will say this, with COVID and with people driving faster, and there was a time where police officers were working a lot of traffic because we were trying to minimize our exposure with COVID. A lot of people have just very boldly started to run from officers, even just on traffic stops. And I can recall just in the past few weeks that I've heard one of our motor officers pull somebody over, and then the vehicle took off from him, and they just all they do is just broadcast that. I just had a vehicle take off from me, and they don't pursue that vehicle because they're pursuing for a traffic violation more often than not, and so they don't even initiate that pursuit.
We had a neighboring agency, 2 cars ran from them today within probably an hour or 2 hour window.
Thank you. And Sean, please.
Thank you. So it seems like it's been a while since we've seen on the news about a lot of, I don't know what it's called, but the maneuver where a police car will push another car and it fishtails and spins out.
It's called PIT, Pursuit Intervention Technique.
Okay, thank you. Has that been discontinued? Because I sure don't see it on the news as a technique, or maybe I'm just missing that.
No, sir. It is still a technique, and it's still a valuable technique. It's just our vehicles have become so computer controlled. We actually have some videos that I would love to show at some point in time if it's ever available, where even vehicles that are 4 or 5 years old now, when you go to pit that vehicle, like different tires will actually start to break to help control that vehicle's stability. And obviously, as vehicles get newer and newer and the technology gets better and better, it's harder and harder to pit that vehicle. When people first started seeing the pits or us pitting vehicles, we were pitting the 88 Honda Accord that had like no traction control, no vehicle stability. It's one thing to pit that, or that pursuit I was mentioning that I was involved in, that was an older pickup. So something like that's going to be able to have the pit maneuver perform very easily versus your higher end European vehicle that has all sorts of different sensors and stability control and traction control and those kind of things.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you. And Nick.
Yes, thank you. Sarge, I was wondering if in this training, this may sound like a silly question, but do you also train our officers where to park their vehicles during traffic stops and or other maybe a non-call? Because I, over time driven around town and it's like, lights are on, so I'm pretty confident there's a good reason you're there, but it's like, why is the car here and not somewhere else? Is that part of this training also?
Yes, absolutely. It's called vehicle stop tactics. And yes, we teach officers to create that lane of the buffer that allows them to safely get out of their vehicle and have that little maintenance of cushion. Drivers aren't very good, even though by state law, they're required to move over a lane if they're allowed to or able to, or at least slow down. So yes, officers are always positioning, with my hands, kind of offset on a traffic stop to give that cushion to where that officer can get out and approach the vehicle safely. And then if you're talking like a high risk vehicle stop, you're going to have multiple vehicles kind of fanning out onto one vehicle. So yes, sir, we do still teach vehicle tactics.
All right, I don't see any other hands. Any other questions or comments about police vehicle operations? No? Well, thank you very much, Sergeant Duncan, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the time.
Yes, thank you, Sergeant. To move on, we're going to talk about a conversation about use of force recommendation. Is that you, Commander?
It's gonna be me.
Kim, all right, thank you.
Evening. So we have begun this conversation last week in the breakout rooms, and we were specifically discussing the 4 recommendations that came from Valerie. Before we kind of go back into that conversation, I wanted to ask first if anyone over the last 2 weeks had another recommendation that they would like to bring forward that we can add to this discussion. If you don't have one right now, but something comes to you in the next 2 weeks, you can feel free to email me. Be happy to add any other comments to the or any other recommendations to the conversation. All right, I don't see any hands for tonight, but that offer still stands. I anticipate we'll still be talking about this in at least one more meeting, if not 2. So please feel free to think about other things that have come up over the last several weeks of use of force recommendations. I believe, Commander, that was our last kind of educational segment in use of force. So now we really are just going to be digging into the recommendations phase before we move into, I think, performance review and discipline. So to add just a little bit of structure to the conversation, I was thinking that it would be good if we spend some time in the breakout rooms again, but this time focus around one of the 4 recommendations that's been brought forward for a more limited amount of time, something like 10 minutes, have some conversation, and then come back together and work out any wordsmithing that needs to be worked out. I've got a slide for each of the recommendations up, so I can pull that up and we can work together and come up with a recommendation. And then because they are very diverse in the topic areas, we can work through them one at a time and come to a conclusion on the recommendation, vote, and then move on to the next one. I'm just going to start, they were numbered 1 through 4. I'm just going to start with number 1. So I'm going to pull that up. Everyone can see it. The recommendation is TPD and Tigard city staff shall work with community leaders and educational specialists to develop regular mandatory training on cross-cultural communication techniques and community interaction with the goal of reducing use of force events involving BIPOC individuals in the Tigard community to a level that is statistically comparable to the percentage of such BIPOC individuals who reside or work in Tigard. I obviously have the copy of it. We're going to be splitting into 3 breakout rooms. So if you have the ability to take a screenshot, please do. Otherwise, this is the verbatim what was emailed out a few weeks ago. All right, so I'm going to send everybody to their rooms. There will be 3 breakout rooms. Please, at the beginning of your session together, select somebody who will be your reporter, who will report out at the end of the meeting, the end of your session, and you'll be going out in just 1 second. But first, Chief, please.
Yeah, I will just recuse myself from the breakout so that people can talk freely, come up with, obviously the recommendations will eventually come to me. And I really want people to talk freely and decide, and then I'll hear what the final outcome was. So if you see me disappear, that is just giving you guys space.
Yeah, and you should have an option when it says take me to the breakout room to just not. Like you can just, so you should be okay, but yeah, feel free to bounce out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. All right, and with that, here are the rooms.
I almost hit the leave meeting button.
What's scary? I have the leave meeting button, but I also have the end meeting for all button that's right next to it, next to like the leave breakout room. And I'm like so careful about which one I hit. I can't imagine that email that goes out of me being like, I'm so sorry, you can get back in now.
That's absolutely something I would do. Zoom is not my best skill, so.
Yeah. I think we still have one more breakout room that is going to the end. Okay, I think we have everybody back. Welcome back. I hope you had fruitful conversations. No, our group certainly did. Do I have a volunteer to report out on your group discussion?
I will go first.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, we had a great discussion in our group. I think in general, the agreement for this recommendation is a good recommendation, and we appreciate in terms of your work, Valerie, in creating this and drafting this for us. What some of our take on is the specificity of the regular training. We could just tone down in terms of, is this going to be a quarterly or yearly, semi-yearly kind of training? That'd be great. Other recommendations to look at other agencies in terms of leveraging some of their practices and experience. And so something that we could add to that. And I think the last one, if correct me if I'm wrong, is adding some statistical work analysis to it to be a little bit more clear in terms of the data that we want to be able to collect on it and be able to use the data accordingly and not just have data just to have data. So we want to make sure that the data we are collecting is going to be driving some of the changes and initiative we want to see.
Thank you for the summary, John.
Thank you.
Group 1 or 2? Jeff, please.
Okay, yeah, again, thanks, Valerie, for putting this together. We had a solid discussion as well. Something we talked about was discussing how different communication styles exist across racial and ethnic backgrounds, because I think when we first got into the meeting, it wasn't quite clear to a couple of members in our group, like the purpose of it. So just making that part clear. Secondly, establishing we'd like the police department to establish a list of providers and consultants that can provide this type of training. Kind of like a step to getting to the training itself, but then you have partners and people you can rely on and go back to. The last thing was just like a language thing, clarify the word techniques, the intent behind it. If it's techniques meaning like best practices or techniques meaning communication styles. But yeah, that's what we had in room 2.
Finally, yes, room 1. We sort of discussed some of the things that were already going on and some of the concept or some of the reasons that there was a statistical difference between the community and the things that were reported. We also discussed who exactly would be these community leaders and educational specialists, and we brainstormed kind of some of the different groups that are available in this area. And then also we went back to the conversations we had last time with Liz Newton and Denny Rauda in terms of getting some of those things started. And I know we're in progress there. And so we're hoping that some of that will feed into this particular conversation. And then we also had just a smidgen of time to talk about what might be the cost for something like this and what that might entail.
Thank you all for those summaries. So as we were getting those, I was updating the recommendation to include some of the information for our continued discussion. So looking here, Jeff's group, TPD and Tigard staff should identify providers of cross-cultural communication, then work with community leaders, neighboring/peer agencies, and educational specialists to procure or develop regular, and then this is still a point of discussion, what regular means, mandatory training on cross-cultural communication techniques. Point was brought up that techniques might be a little vague, so if we can have some discussion around firming up that definition. And community interaction with the goal of reducing use of force events involving BIPOC individuals in the Tigard community to a level that is statistically comparable to the percentage of such BIPOC individuals who reside or work in Tigard. And again, a portion of that highlighted in red that is open for discussion. So just on initial reading, beyond the points that still need to be discussed, does this adequately capture the conversations that you had in your rooms? I see head nodding, great. So moving forward from that, is there anything that, now that you're reading this for the first time with all of the comments incorporated, anything that sticks out that might still be missing? Jeff.
Thanks, I raised the finger instead of the button, thanks. I think the first group talked about analysis, right? Was that John?
John, yeah, and in that was around the statistically comparable
okay.
line. There was some context in our room, but that was
okay.
Thank you for bringing that up. All right, so then I would like to move towards discussing some of, Valerie, please.
So I thought that what was it, groups 2, Jeff's group, mentioned about techniques was really helpful and interesting, because when I had put that together, I was thinking in terms of best practices. But communication styles is certainly, so maybe techniques should be best practices, but then I don't want to leave acknowledgement of different communication styles by the wayside too. So I'm not really sure how we do that.
Yeah, and we can I'll do this in real time. Cross-cultural communication styles, best practices, and community interaction.
Yeah, that looks good to me.
Thank you, Valerie. Sean, please.
I know this is probably pretty minor, but in that last section, I just want to make sure or help see if we can get an apples to apples comparison, because we're talking about this people stopped or engaged, and then it turns into use of force that are passing through versus our residents, which are two different groups. Anyways, I don't have any fantastic ideas about how to write this to get the apples to apples that I think we want. But anyways, I just want to bring it up.
Yeah, and I appreciate that suggestion. I think one of the things that Valerie captured very well in here is the line reside or work in Tigard, kind of gets at some of that more complex statistics, but I'll let Valerie speak for herself.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, Sean, because we do want to make sure that we do apples to apples. I think maybe when we talk about the second recommendation, where we talk about data aggregation, can we put a pin in your point for now and then circle back to it after we talk about data aggregation? Because I want to make sure that we understand what populations we're working with here.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion.
Sounds good.
So when we talk about developing regular training, does anyone have thoughts about the specificity of time? Oh, Valerie, I don't know if your hand's still up.
Yeah, my hand, no, I just raised it again. I'm actually curious about what Commander McDonald and Officer Nunn have to say about this, because they work with the officers and understand how the training processes work and what is meaningful training that people are likely to stick in people's brain, as opposed to, I mean, I have family members who have to do an annual online training about various different things, and they get grumpy about it and they do it, but then they forget it as soon as they finish it. So, what would be meaningful?
Well, certainly no more often than annually, and for a number of reasons. One, I'm not sure that, I mean, the amount of time that it takes to get everyone through even a once annual training is pretty significant, even if we're talking for, say, an hour. We do, for example, and it isn't even annually, and it's not mandatory. Well, it is mandatory internally, but we do, for instance, training for, interactions with people that are hearing impaired, right? As an example. And so we do those, making sure that we do them often enough that people remember how to have those interactions. And then when things change, because we know that constantly things are evolving and getting better or changing, different to different for different reasons and different forms of communication, maybe. So annually, I think is most certainly an appropriate amount of time. Quarterly would be probably overkill. Most years we don't even do firearms training quarterly. So, and I think if Sergeant Duncan was still on here, he'd be thrilled if we did vehicle training at least once a year. So annually, I think would be certainly appropriate, an appropriate amount of time or interval.
And maybe that's something we could suggest annually, but with the thought that experts in this field and educational specialists may have thoughts about that as well.
And I think part of it is how the training's conducted.
Sure.
How long the training is. So that all goes into how often and all that as well.
Sure.
Sean, please.
Commander McDonald, I'm curious how much of this or similar training the police department is doing now. You just mentioned training for hearing impaired, which is great. It was actually something we were talking about in our breakout group. Is there any other training you're doing now that is similar to what's being described here?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I guess the thing that is big, the biggest difference here is when we're talking about things like at least annual mandatory training. Now, we have a lot of internal training that we call mandatory. It isn't required by the state, but it's required by the department. Something that the chief, myself, the other commander, the lieutenants, when we've decided is best practice, whether it's best practice for Tigard Police Department or best practice industry wide is left, up to us to make that determination. Because oftentimes we will conduct training here that is not being conducted elsewhere. The hearing impaired training is one, for example. We've done training on transgender. So, I mean, and yes, and cross-cultural as well. In the group I was in, we talked about the relationship we have with the Muslim Educational Trust that's here in Tigard. And, we've been a part of their Building Bridges program since its inception 6 years ago. And so it's through partnerships like that we continue to build that learning and understanding of different cultures. So when we're talking about formalized training, we do have some, but it's not, I couldn't pin it down as being like annual training for a lot of that stuff. A lot of it is just kind of ongoing awareness training and relationship building that we do as an agency. So, but yeah, we have a variety of different things that we do, and it isn't just when we're talking about cultural. We talk about just, maybe say the BIPOC community, for example. We, like I said, hearing impaired, LGBTQ plus, transgender training specifically, some different things like that for the awareness of the appropriate way to interact with different groups of people, different communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commander. Thank you, Sean, for the question. And Jeff, please.
Yeah, I think Commander McDonald just kind of touched on it. That the knowledge of how people communicate across communities is different. I think that's the most important thing for the general awareness of the department. And it's hard to capture in, a clean sentence around one specific training. But I think the high level overall goal should be to embed that knowledge across the department and across trainings to, create that or, continue to create that general awareness for the department.
Thanks, Jeff. And Jimmy, please.
There we go. All right. So, relative to the discussion, I think an RFP process can help to clarify the type of training and frequency of training to those who would respond to the RFP. An RFP provider can be asked how would they conduct such a training in a police department, or what is their experience or exposure to conducting such a training across an organization that has a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week workforce. Because I think that the dynamics of a 24/7 organization should not be, or the makeup of a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week organization should not be a determining factor in whether or not a training is done quarterly or annually. I know there are certainly some cost implications that have to be looked at if you have to bring someone in on overtime and you have to pay to have someone come in and back those other officers up while they're on training. But the RFP respondent can tell you what their expertise is in working across those type of potential barriers. So, I've worked with consultants across the criminal justice system in the Department of Community Justice in Multnomah County, which is a 24/7 kind of operation. And they've been able to provide the types of training that ensures that all staff, regardless of their shifts, are receiving that type of training. So, it is doable.
Yeah, no, Jimmy, you're totally right. It's doable. Absolutely. We have to provide training for all of our people, regardless of what shift they work on, all the time. So we have training at 2:00 in the morning sometimes, because that's the time that works best to get our night shift folks their training. So yeah, I'm not concerned about that. Now, a vendor might be concerned about coming in at 2:00 in the morning, but it's going to be what works best for us. And if that doesn't work for them, well, then I guess maybe they're not the right person for the job. So yeah, so that isn't a concern of us in the police department at all. It actually creates more opportunities for us because we are a 24/7 operation. So.
And Jimmy, I think I tried to capture kind of the spirit of your request of going back to the experts for questions like frequency. So at least annual, or the recommendation of a qualified provider. Does that capture that? Great. And then there was the last item for discussion, which was statistically comparable to percentage of such BIPOC individuals. And I think Valerie's point, she made it in our breakout room, and then again here is well taken, that while these recommendations do cover different areas, there is still some overlap between them. So I'd move that we kind of table that area and move on to the second recommendation at our next meeting. and discuss more about the statistics and the data report out. That work? All right, I see at least one thumbs up, so I'm going to take that as a good sign. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. We are unfortunately running low on time, and I want to make sure there was an email that went out from Eduardo this week about laser shot training. I think I'm calling it the right thing. And I wanted Commander McDonald to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about what that is and the process for getting scheduled.
So one of the things that we wanted to do, and did I mention having the opportunity to go through some scenario-based training for the board to be able to do that at some point? Maybe yes, no, thumbs up for, okay, I see a few nods. Okay, well, here's our chance now to actually go and do it. So in the email from Eduardo, Sergeant Jared Prater, who you have not met yet, is one of our sergeants that is a firearms instructor and an overall use of force instructor. And he is going to make himself available when at times that work well for all of you. He's got quite a bit of latitude that I've given to him to be able to help schedule if you're interested to come in and go through the laser shot scenario-based training. It's I hesitate to call it a large video game, but ultimately that's kind of what it is, but it's incredibly complicated and complex. It provides feedback and provides a variety of different options as it goes through based on the actions of the individual that is interacting with the unit. So it's an incredible training tool for us. And we would like, now that you have all been through at least a very basic level of use of force, I guess, training, for lack of a better word, have the opportunity to go through and experience some of the scenario-based training that we provide to our officers. And hopefully it'll give you the chance to have a perspective, maybe into the eyes of some of the training that we do, the actual hands-on training, because it will be actual hands-on training. You will be hands-on with some different tools that we use. And you'll have the opportunity to go through those with a very seasoned sergeant and likely one additional instructor as well, so that you'll have the chance to experience that. So please, if you're interested, take the chance, reach out to Jared at either the phone number or the email that Eduardo sent in the email. And Jared will get back to you. He's in a class all day tomorrow. So if you email him tonight, all excited to get signed up, and he doesn't get back to you right away, it's because he's in class all day tomorrow. So, so he'll get back to you and start scheduling times that'll be hopefully convenient for you, that'll work into your schedules.
And Valerie.
I wonder if this is an opportunity for not just our own education, but also to educate members of the community. And I hesitate to volunteer to do anything that might show up on a video or something, but it might be interesting to involve your information officer in this process as well. I'll volunteer some of my other board members to be the subject of such videos, but it might be interesting for the public to get a perspective on it, in addition to having us get a perspective on it.
Yeah, and that's something that I've talked about with her a little bit, and we have a few ideas brewing, but I think we're going to wait until the board has an opportunity to go through before we pitch any of those ideas out, because a couple of them I guarantee will generate significant interest in the community. So we also have, before COVID, we were able to deploy it for our open house. Yeah. And we were able to do demonstrations at our open house. So if you happen to see it at that, you're actually going to get to do it hands-on, whereas at the open house, it was officers doing demonstrations and showing you how we use it as a training tool. So yes, Valerie, we have discussed that, and she has a lot of probably better ideas than I do. And so we'll discuss it more, but we really do want to give the board the opportunity to experience it first before we maybe do something on video that we would send out. So.
Yeah. And in addition to that, I'm sure there'll be someone will volunteer to be on video, right? But we'll also have a PSAB portion of a meeting dedicated to a debrief after folks have had the opportunity to go through it. So we can share that publicly in this forum. And Nick Jarmer, please.
Yeah, thank you. Real quick. Yeah, I'm going to sign up to do this, Commander, because it looks really cool. Is it all individual, or I'm just wondering, throwing it out to the board here, would it be better if like 3 or 4 of us were there? I don't know if it's only individual at a time, or if you could do 2, but I'll let you guys figure that out. But I would wonder if it's for scheduling purposes, if it's something like 3 of us can make it at a certain time, if that would be easier or not, something like that.
I second that motion.
Yeah, I talked with Jared about it a little bit. So the scenarios, all of you will get the same scenarios, the exact same ones, so that you all will have all experienced the exact same, the same thing that you're going through, the same experience, hopefully. And then in terms of 2 or 3 of you at the same time, in terms of to be able to make it have the training as useful as possible, it's probably best for 1 at a time to go through. Now, whether or not having another observe, like maybe after they've gone through their scenarios, probably isn't, I mean, that is probably workable. If there was going to be one that would be maybe a 2-officer scenario, you would have another instructor with you. So you'd actually have an officer with you is how he was explaining to me. And then the other thing with having 3 or 4 people in that space, we have COVID restrictions here at the city, as Eduardo sent out, that actually limits us in the space that we have for however many people we can have in there. We're living in COVID. So anyway, so we've put a little bit of thought into it. So I think that there may be some possibilities with that. I'll talk with Jared a little bit more about it on Wednesday, and we'll see what we can do from there. But yeah, we'll check into whether or not that might work.
Thank you, Commander. And in our last couple meetings, our last couple minutes of this meeting, I just want to check in with next steps. So please sign up for later shot training, get a hold of Jared when you can. We'll be sending out that, I think actually Justin already sent out the Oregonian article. And next week, in 2 weeks, we will be continuing our recommendations conversation from tonight, moving into recommendation number 2. Please also consider any other recommendations that you would like to add to this group of 4 as we start moving through everything. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, a lot of discussion tonight, and I appreciate everyone's input and comments on all the topics that were presented today. I know that we're out of time, so does anyone have any events or that impact the Tigard community that you want to bring up?
Jimmy, last comment for the night.
Okay, I don't have any events, but I do want to publicly acknowledge the work that Valerie did on the recommendations. I think it gave us a robust discussion, and I think that's always good for the board as well as for any community members that are watching.
Very well said, Jimmy. Thank you, Valerie. All right, with that, I call for a motion to adjourn. Anyone want a motion?
So moved.
You want a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion or opposition? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.